Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, hosted by the Organization Development and Change Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. This is a monthly webinar series presented during your lunch hour. My name is Yulin Chang, and I am a PhD candidate in Workforce Education and Development Program. We also have Sekun Kiri, who is the moderator for Q&A session. Today, we are presenting Fireproof, a case for rapid response OD during the time of organizational crisis and accelerated change, presented by Ron Banerjee. In terms of the interactive format for this webinar, please use the chat feature in the Zoom platform. If you have any questions about the presentation, please use Q&A feature on Zoom. You can see Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. The Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change are designed for professionals who need the skills and knowledge to effectively lead change in their organization. Furthermore, there is a PhD program in Workforce Education and Development with a concentration in human resource development and organization development. Our program has created a continuous monthly webinar series with experts around the world. Today, our presenter is Ron Banerjee. Ron is a financial advisor specializing in the test exam market for Voya Financial Advisors. He's also a training and development officer for the Center for Independent Living of Central PA. Ron is a PhD candidate in Workforce Education and Development at Penn State University. He also received his MPS degree in Organization Development and Change from Penn State. Ron is an active community leader holding leadership positions in a variety of organizations such as OD Network and Penn State World Campus Alumni Society. Now, please join me in welcoming our speaker. Ron, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the OD and Change program at Penn State for allowing me to present to you today. This presentation is designed for the scholar practitioner. So we have a number of scholars who are in attendance today, as well as practitioners. And I intentionally designed this so that it would bridge both of those communities so that we can look at some of the theory-based aspects of the RROD model and also apply the practical aspects of it through some discussion on making a case for fireproofing organizations. So, by a raise of hands in the chat room, I'd like you to answer a couple of questions, not a big deal, but just raise your hand using the mechanism in Zoom. If you've ever experienced crisis at your current or past organization. Then I'd like you to raise your hand or indicate in the chat if you've ever had to make a quick decision at the time of crisis or under a great deal of pressure. The final question I want to ask is, raise your hand or indicate if you want to assist others in improving their skills to be able to effectively, successfully address and prepare for unexpected crisis or change. That last portion is what brings you here today, and that last portion contributed to the birth of this presentation. On your screen in front of you is a quote from John Cotter, essentially structuring or suggesting that leadership is, of course, related to change. And as that change accelerates, there is a greater need for leadership. The RROD model sprang from that need for effective leadership during those times of crisis. So let's move ahead. So we talked about these different questions that I had for you. And so the reason why I asked is each of us have experienced some level of crisis, some level of extreme pressure that we've either witnessed or had placed upon us, or if we were participating in a situation, we felt that it was maybe untenable, it was overwhelming. It happens every day, especially post-pandemic. People are still trying to adjust to the context of their workforces and their environments at work. So these are very appropriate questions to ask even some of your clients or some of your colleagues when discussing how to brainstorm or how to effectively utilize your skill set to help with the change of unexpected crises. So the way this came about is I wrote a series of articles called Agile or Fragile. And it started out just thinking about like why organizations today are they simply how well are you equipped to handle unexpected change? That actually started in 2019, as indicated by this timeline. But imagine how I felt where I was already exploring this and the decision-making processes going into some of this where organization development meets crisis management. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic hits. So out of that entire timeline came this presentation and the RROD model. And basically, it's to help explore what the decision-making cycles are in the various types of organizations and how business executives or leaders or even people that are working on their special projects can deal with unplanned change at different stages in decision-making and in their life cycles. So essentially, this is all about preparedness. So before we get into the program, I just want to play a quick video clip about what sometimes it's like when you're dealing with crisis.
Baby, 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 baby.
So something going a business, and then you realize it happens, and then it begins to morph into...
hello, it says here you sell double glazing. Do you have a piece in stock?
Multiple.
Let's say 4 by 8 meters?
Problems.
Only in frosted glass, yeah. They only have it in frosted glass! Nah, I'm sure they'll
At one
notice
point,
it.
you decide any solution is a good solution.
Ah, you install straight away. Oh, brilliant. How much is it then? Including putty? Not, okay. No problem, I'll keep looking. Thanks, ta-ra.
That last part is my favorite part of that whole thing. But again, sometimes just everything is going wrong and it chain reacts into other things. So when that happens, what do? And to answer that question, each of us is wired very differently. So I'm going to run you through something called the alphabet challenge. And the alphabet challenge is one that I'm only going to use 2 different instances. So the first one is this. As you're looking at this, all of the participants, I'm sure, have an answer as to what letter would go into that space to produce a word that is meaningful. So, of course, you picked M for many. Now, that is pretty big. You probably recognized the ANY and the way we are wired, and we would answer that quickly. But this one is a little bit more challenging. So as you look through that, there's some of you that'll come up with an answer very quickly, others it'll take a little bit longer. But what we do, and the premise of this slide, is to suggest that as we explore different problems through our mindsets, we come up with a strategy of our own to solve that problem. Some of you Maybe you started at A and worked your way to B, then C, then D, and oh, you hit D, and then the word deny made total sense. Maybe some of you, although probably fewer of you, chose to just throw different letters in there to hopefully see a letter, and then when you hit D, it worked. Whatever way you chose, it is an actual strategy and the way you think for problem solving. So the point is that each one of us is wired differently, but what we have is we have a process when we are looking to decide what to do or how to form a solution. We go about it in a variety of different ways, but usually it's not just random, it is planned and it is deliberate. The next slide is going to focus on the concept of what is a black swan. You will hear me talk about it. You may have read about this in different business journals and the Wall Street Journal, for example. A black swan event or black swans date back to the times of Aristotle. And Aristotle believed that there was no such things as black swans. Every swan that he ever had seen, every swan that had been documented through all of mankind in terms of what he believed was, in fact, white. So a black swan was not possible. But as some people were exploring, and they explored the world in Australia, an explorer comes across and he finds a black swan. So what then happened at that moment, and he documented it, was the impossible became possible. So why do I mention that now? I mention that now because this term, black swan, is utilized in business today and is used quite often when talking about an unprepared for incident or crisis that they completely believed was an impossibility of happening. So at the center of the fireproofing strategy is trying to understand exactly what is necessary and what crisis management is in order to figure out how we can use organization development to help figure it out. Now, this is a definition that I saw and I kind of got lost in it. And I just, after reading it, I said, what does that mean? What does that really mean? Well, what it means is really that if you tackle a situation with confidence during times of chaos, and that confidence is based on a commitment to the organization, a commitment to being consistent in your response, and also consistent and continuous in your communication to all the members of the organization, all the critical stakeholders. That is at the core of fireproofing strategy. So many of you have heard me before talk about burning platforms. Well, the burning platform story begins back in 1988 in the evening on an oil rig out in the North Sea. They're drilling for oil, and then suddenly a fire happens. Unfortunately, 166 crew members were lost, including 2 rescuers, in what was believed to be the worst disaster in the 25-year history of exploring for oil in the North Sea. One of the 63 survivors who survived was named Andy Mochin. And Andy was a supervisor and he was a superintendent on the rig. This is an actual picture of the rig as it was on fire. And these 166 crew members were trapped on board the platform. So Andy's story is one that is absolutely fascinating and is a cornerstone of a lot of change management and leadership decision-making discussions. Andy's story starts with Andy realizing that they are all in a fire control room as the platform is burning. Now, the suppression system has worked year in, year out, every time it's been tested, but the fire suppression system is not working. And these 166 people are basically locking themselves into the control room. And they keep waiting and waiting for something that doesn't happen. He realizes and he knows it's 15 stories from the top of the platform to the ice cold water below. That water is frigid, it's Arctic. He knows that once they're in the water, they have a maximum of 25 minutes that they can live if they aren't rescued. And the worst thing about it is he also realizes that the oil has ignited now on the surface. So the one place, even if they could go, it is now on fire. And he goes out there, he explores while others are locked in the fire control room. In the control room, they're not moving. They keep waiting for something that is not coming. Andy decides that he's going to jump 150 feet, 15 stories in the middle of the night into that frigid ocean, including the burning oil and debris. In his words, he said it was either jump or fry. But the moral of the story is he chose possible death over certain death. So here's some key things to consider about Andy's story. Consider this. Andy jumped. He had no choice, in his opinion, but to jump. It was either if he stayed on the platform and maintained status quo, he was definitely going to die. He chose the risk of possible survival, even though minute, over certain death. So the lesson here is sometimes it takes radical change, and in uncertain and frightening times, you have to make a decision and you have to take the risk at that moment, even if it is at a high cost, but especially if it is any possible way for you to survive, or the organization in this case to survive. The fact of the matter is burning platforms exist. Swift decision, you need to make swift decisions. And it is that devastating circumstance that you're considering, but it's a viability and sustainability versus perishing argument. Young and Holiday talk about adaptive action, and that is, as you understand a situation, your ability to take action changes. So often what happens is urgency forces you to make decisions that you normally would not do. So this is a little bit of a summary of Connor, who coined the burning platform moment, and what he says, and it's things that we also understand. Urgency is foundational. We've heard that in Cotter. We also know that there are two important things about proposed change, is that there has to be a necessity, and that different types of change require different responses to change. And so this situational leadership in those moments is really important, and especially when the situation appears to be untenable. So there are 5 steps to fireproofing the organization. Understanding the psychology of the particular moment you're in, understanding what really is meant by agility, understanding the meaning of change, how it works, understanding how to handle change during that time of crisis, and then the mechanism at the end of the fireproofing is understanding how real-time OD is available to you and what rapid response OD or RROD truly is as a tool for all of your quivers as you practice OD and study OD. So let's look at understanding the psychology of the moment for a minute. So as change practitioners or scholars, we understand that change can be an external or internal stimuli-driven mechanism or action. We have planned and unplanned change. And the planned change, for example, is, deliberate change management. There's something that's coming up, and you put a project in place, and you have certain milestones, and it's all planned. Talent management. We have some gurus on this very call that focus on talent management, and that is their jam. That is what they do well, and it's how to best use talent to its fullest potential and attract the best talent and keep the best talent. And of course, there's project management, which again uses milestones in a deliberate fashion so that you can move from point A to point B effectively and efficiently. But on unplanned change, that is also crisis management. So in order to understand the psychology of the moment, there's something called organizational or team cognition. And that what that understanding is that there is an ability for all of us as members of our teams and organizations to have an understanding in what the process and organization has available to them, how it works, how it functions, who does what. It doesn't mean that everybody on the team or in the organization knows exactly what the other people in that organization or on that team know, but they share enough of an understanding that they know how people function and what skills they have so that they can effectively be a part of that system or that organization. Shared cognition enhances the team's ability to motivate around different things and coordinate and adapt to different situations. So if we know, in fact, that there are certain people that really do well with project management, then we can identify those and they can be our change champions, but utilizing project management in a manner that we know they can do. So the next part is, so we can be familiar, but too much familiarity in terms of, oh, this is my friend, I know he does this or she does this. And, what happens is you think that they are really good at what they're doing because you are very familiar with the person, but you're not very familiar with their skill set. So it's better to be professionally familiar than personally familiar. So there are 8 types of shared cognitions. I'm not going to go into them now, but this is really worth a good read. But the answer to this is a lot of, it also is very helpful when you're studying strategic leadership, right? And shared cognitions for your team or your organization answer these questions and how they're related to some other terms that you're going to recognize. Where to, right? What's the vision of the organization? What's the purpose? What are our goals? That's something that we need to have a shared understanding on. What's important? Did the organization share what priorities they have? Who should be doing that? Yeah, what are the different roles we have in our organization? The other thing is how to do that. That's that development of norms and categorizing interdependencies between divisions, between individuals. We know my job relies on this other person's job in order for us both to be successful. The next question is why are we doing this? What's the rationale behind doing what we do? The other one is, again, who knows? Who's the best at this particular task or this orientation? And we ask them, what's their expertise? The next question is what if, right? A shared cognition also understands that if there are any contingencies in place, if something happens, then what? And then finally, it's what's up. And that is, what is the honest situation that we are in? And what cues can we take about our situation? This is a little bit, this is something I can talk to you offline about. There are different ways to build that shared cognition. You can start out these different stages of direction setting, preparing, updating, and assimilating. You can talk to me offline, but this is Tannenbaum and Salas. They have different ways of building shared cognition, which is important, as I mentioned, as one of the areas of understanding the psychology of change and how it is impacting others and how they are going to respond. So let's move to another interesting topic. This is called the milk carton principle. We all face situations where we think, oh my goodness, I have dealt with this so many different times, and I don't know why we cannot figure this out. Well, this story came from a man who goes to his divorce or his marriage counselor and says, I want to divorce my wife. And the divorce counselor says, okay, tell me the reason. And he said, I can't stand the fact that we both work. She goes into the office a little bit earlier than me. We both love coffee. We need coffee to get our days going. So they go and they make their coffee. She makes it first, pours the milk into her coffee, into her travel mug, and then promptly leaves, leaving the milk on the kitchen counter. And the husband says, I cannot stand when I come down and every time she leaves the milk out. The counselor kind of chuckles and says, oh, come on, really? All right, how long has this gone on? And the man says, 9 years, 9 years. And the counselor says, oh my goodness, 9 years you've been dealing with this? That's unbelievable. And then she says, you know what the definition of insanity is, right? And we all know what that is to be. And the definition of insanity is doing something over and over again, expecting a different result. So he said, yes, I know all about that, but what can I do? I've just had it. It's disrespectful to me. It means all these other things. I've tried to communicate. I've done all the things you probably would ask me to do. And she said, but wait a minute. I want you to think about something. What have you done so far? And he just said what I just said. I talked to her. I expressed myself. All these things that are supposed to work, they don't. And then she said, well, I ask you again, what could you do differently that would make this situation more tenable? And he thought a little bit and he said, you know what? I'm going to buy my own milk carton and I'll keep it separately. And I'll put mine away and she can leave hers out. And when that milk spoils, then she'll understand. So the point of the story is, are you in a situation where you keep trying to do something over and over again and you're not getting the result that you want? That's a prompt where you should recognize that it's time to get creative and thinking and look at something that maybe didn't cross your mind. Well, fireproofing is about that. It's about reframing the situation and looking at things in a creative way or an innovative way, which is at the core of what organization development is. And we uncover things generatively to do that, right? So why not be able to do that in a crisis situation and prompt that creative thinking and innovation? In doing that, we also have to understand how people think and what makes them tick in their thinking. The De Bono's 6 thinking hats, if you're familiar with it, bear with me as I walk through it, but it's a kind of role play that says that we all view things through different lenses, or in this case, we wear hats of different colors. And each one of those hats is specific to how we deal with a particular situation and the lens that we look through these things with. So here are the 6 thinking hats, and I want you to take a look at it. And over the next few slides, you'll see these definitions over and over again. So again, the white hat focuses on data, facts, very analytic information that's known or needed. And in order to make decisions, that's what they need. The red hat, however, focuses on feelings, gut instinct, hunches. What's my intuition about this situation? The black hat wearer focuses on, oh my gosh, they're the worriers. If I don't, what are the difficulties we're going to have in this? What are the potential problems? Why won't this work? What could sabotage what we're trying to do? The yellow hat, in turn, focuses on, okay, is this in line with what our values are and what we believe in? Do we like what something is going to do or how something is going to possibly work? The green hat is more creative and it focuses on the possibilities of maybe a future state if we are studiers of appreciative inquiry. We think about solutions and alternatives and bright new ideas. The blue hat is in charge of the task orientation. That's the project manager in us that looks at these action plans and what's the steps to make that happen. So what I'd like you to do through our chat, I'd just like each one of you to answer what hat you wear. Are you a white hat, red hat, black hat, yellow hat, green hat, or blue hat? Please answer in the chat, and Abby and our team will tally what our audience is looking like today in terms of how many of which hats are in our audience. I'm just curious about that because that tells a lot about how you will handle fireproofing. So the next, is a summary. The summary of the 6 hats says, you know what? It helps us understand that we have a diversity, maybe not only in the makeup of our workforce, but in how we think and our points of view in a very controlled situation. That controlled environment is that within the context of our organizations or even our teams. We achieve more of a comprehensive understanding, and we create sounder solutions when we look at the various limits that we have within our organization and within our thought processes and our points of view. And what it does inevitably is if you understand that people think differently and you are comfortable with that and you encourage that, it fosters respect and awareness of different opinions, and that in turn values every member and every stakeholder in your organization. Maybe the other thing is that we have an opportunity to explore hypothetical situations and try to minimize the confrontation for different ideas, instead respecting the fact that others will have this way of looking at things. Agility is something that is in the news quite a bit. There are different definitions, as you see here, whether it's agility is the ability to create the future, anticipate opportunity, adapt quickly, and learn. There are different stakeholders in the strategy itself, the organization itself, the leader exhibiting, that they're a stakeholder in agility, and of course, the individuals who are members of the group. Agility is sustained by these 4 well-known HR tools: people, performance, information, and work. So we know what agility is. So the idea is if we are agile and have the ability to change and we're prepared, that means that we're going to be able to manage whatever change, whatever crisis comes our way. The meaning of change, we all as practitioners or scholars have an understanding of what shared definitions of change are. We also know that change can be incremental in certain cases, or it might require radical change, Andy jumping off the platform. We also know that there must be a change message that is being received, and there are people that should be in charge of sending that message and people that will be receiving that message. There is a great article by Tim Creasy that talks about, are you telling somebody something or are you communicating something? There's a big difference. And what that difference is change management communications, times during crisis, they target a particular audience, which could be the members themselves or an aspect of the organization. They share what's going on, what the meaning of that change is. They address what specific concerns are, and they meet the audience where they are in the change process. That's really important. They recognize, they validate where they are in this process. So the timing and what is in it and what messages are being sent by the sender are so important. Can't tell you that enough. The communication plan is uniquely effective for these 4 reasons. It's part of an overall plan. It's not the plan, but part of a plan. It's part of an overall change management process. It's built on a foundation of individual change, and it focuses on them, not on us. It's focused on the people that you are speaking to or getting the message to, but not as a collective. The reason why is the WIFM. It's the one, what's in it for me. You have to focus on them. We understand that change is 3-part. This comes from Lewin, as you know, from unfreeze, and then, or in the current state that it is, the transition state, and then the future state. We know that that is basic, but what really is going on with any change, or especially in times of change and crisis, is that there are all these mini forms of these changes simultaneously happening, and we've got to handle all of them in order to manage that crisis properly. So remember, anytime you see one big change, it is probably the sum of all these smaller changes. If you're a fan of systems thinking, that makes sense, as I am. I'm a big fan of that. So now that we've talked about change, how do we handle it? Well, there are two biggest enemies of change during times of crises. One is time, of course. Just don't have time. What if Andy took too much time to jump from that platform? He would have been consumed. The other one is poor leadership. You want a leader who is visible, that is engaged in whatever the process is that she is dictating. It doesn't mean necessarily that she is dictating what we are doing as practitioners, but she is listening, she is visible. She needs to give the impression that she's got things handled. Especially during the pandemic, think about how many leaders really came to the forefront to be able to adjust properly. So the other thing is, the worst thing that can happen, though, is a manager or a leader who absolutely thinks that they have all the right answers, and they can be the worst leaders. And do you understand why? It's because they think they know it all, but in fact, they don't know it all. They're detached. It's the common crux of what organization development specialists we deal with. Right? We know that the frontline people generatively will give us the answers to what really is going on so that we can turn to the people on Mount Olympus and be able to tell them what truly is going on, other than what maybe is not being shown in all the reports that the C-level executives are getting. So the key is really to have somebody who's active and visible at the helm of that process, preferably the main leader of the organization, or at least a team that is very visible throughout, because that will instill confidence and credibility to everything that is being done during the time of crisis. You should be able to anticipate also that people will flee to areas of comfort. They will resist change if at all possible. So in order to eliminate it, you have to acknowledge it, you have to understand it, you have to validate it, but then you have to give the alternative, and you have to hammer home what is in it for me, the WIFM. How are they going to benefit? What is in it for them? So we get to the final area, and that is, can leaders accelerate that decision-making so that we can deliver those valuable interventions and guidance in real time as OD practitioners and leaders? Well, that's where RROD comes in. Utilizing RROD is one of the tools in your toolbox. As a practitioner, as a scholar, you will be able to analyze situations and create quick, decisive responses, but without cheapening the OD process. In an interview I had with Ed Schein, he said that, Ron, every interaction, every conversation is an intervention. And I thought about that as I developed this model, and it really is true. Everything you do, every person you talk to, and during a time of crisis is in fact an opportunity for an intervention, or a mini intervention if you think of it. So before we get into the model, what are the critical considerations of fireproofing? You have to take into consideration that there are cultural norms that are different for every organization, values, different power structures, and whatnot. So you have to make sure that even their history of change, especially with me in the financial industry, we have change on a regular basis. That's what my dissertation is about, regulatory change. So are these obstacles, are they insurmountable? Of course not, with the right practice. And change is a dynamic process. You have to roll up your sleeves, and you have to get in, and you have to deliberately make it move faster. But what helps is when you have a structure and you have something that is a repeatable system. So you might recognize this guy. That's Tiger Woods. You might recognize this guy, maybe not as much, but that's Rory McIlroy. And perhaps if you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan like I am, you recognize the terrible towel. I had an opportunity to talk to somebody who went to school with Rory McIlroy. And he was saying how amazing it was that Rory would get up and his coach would put a towel the size of a regular towel out on the fairway of the golf course. He would go into the tee box and he would have to hit that towel with his swing. That's how accurate these guys were. I also went to a golf tournament and I saw a trailer where Nike kept all of the golf clubs that Tiger Woods uses. And are you ready for this? Most of us would change the way we swing depending on the system. These golfers have the same swing for everything, but they changed the club. They changed the tool, but the consistency is so strong that the size and the shape and all these things of the club itself, not the swing, allows them to dial in. So it creates a muscle memory, if you will, of what they have. But does an organization have that? Sure. What creates that muscle memory? Standard operating procedures. If you follow those on a regular basis and you make this agile kind of thinking and this RROD process in as a standard operating procedure, anything that comes your way, any wind situation, whatever, you want to adjust your swing, you'll just adjust the tools that you use. So this is, in a nutshell, what RROD is about. It achieves the mission of most stakeholders in the sense that it increases preparedness. It allows real-time responses and in a manner that is immediately impactful and engaging, especially during times of crisis. So the vision of it is to have a tool that enables the organization to be ready to have a black swan contingency plan. And here's the model itself. As you can see, it's based on theory of Lewin building in Cotter's 8 stages, and then Peter Senge's different systems thinking and how change is broken down. So without getting into it, I know it's a little bit hard to read, but this is a summary of the RROD process. You identify what the black swan is. You instill the confidence that you need to be showcasing by showcasing your leadership. You create that rapid response OD change response team. That is critical. Dr. Rothwell talks about in many of his writings about the dream team, creating that opportunity, or some organizations manage change that way. The critical thing is step 4, and as I talked about, is communicating all of those, how serious it is, how it impacts everyone, and how it impacts every single constituency. What's in it for me? What's happening to them? Build those stakeholder relationships, and then you inspire the creativity of OD and getting generative and inventive and innovative, and you help with those processes. The final step is the 4 R's: reevaluate, revise, repurpose, and repeat. And you do that enough times, as many times as you need to, until you are in a situation that your confidence is great and you are allowing the RROD model to really influence the change and be able to tackle that, especially during times of crisis. So that's the RROD model. So to recap, there are 5 steps for fireproofing your organizations. You need to understand the psychology of the moment. You have to understand the meaning of agility. You have to understand the meaning of change. Is it incremental or is it drastic? You have to understand how to manage change during times of crisis. Excuse me. And then finally, you introduce RROD as the mechanism for real-time change. If doing this effectively, this is what happens. You look at the process, you are coaching, much as OD allows us to do. We are coaching the leaders into how to communicate, what their capabilities are for change, cognition, understanding, helping them make people understand what the conditions are for the change that is approaching. We have the ability to foster cooperation, even out of shared or ideas, or even different opinions, the different hats that we use. And of course, we're hoping for the best outcomes, and that is the sustainability and the viability of the organizations or teams that we are in. So a few final thoughts. Great managers and leaders master managing change, understanding the people who they lead and how they handle change. And we need to know that there is a belief that organizations don't really change, but people do. The other thing is people rely on us as practitioners, as professionals, as scholars, to take them from merely surviving to thriving when facing change, especially during crisis. We need to be able to reaffirm the confidence that they have in their organization that they can handle this change. And finally, people don't really plan to fail, they fail to plan. And change is hard, we know this. So with our presence and coaching and helping control and teaching people how to act with grace under pressure, we will have high engagement-based decisions, which will make changes much easier. So that in a nutshell, everyone, I know it's moving at breakneck speed because of our lunch hour. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. Again, special thanks to our Organization Development and Change Program at Penn State, to Abby and Sagan and our team, to Dr. Donahue, and all the others who have made this series, all the previous speakers and those speakers to come. I really appreciate the opportunity. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Sagan to take us through the Q&A portion of our presentation.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for the great presentation. We have quite a few questions here, and I will get started with the first one. So the first question is, can you explain how RROD can be implemented when organizations are facing unanticipated crisis like COVID-19? Thinking about the scenarios back to the end of 2019 to the year 2020.
Sure. If you don't mind, I'm going to go back to the RROD slide. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I think that comes to mind is they kind of did, Disney did something which was amazing, is that was when Disney Plus came out. So the process that they used was not quite RROD, but it was, they needed some real-time decision-making. And I looked at that and it was a lot of consensus building and whatnot. And they spent a lot of money and a lot of time, which they really didn't have to create that response. What I have found in talking to people when I run this by the leaders of their organizations and say, look, here's a model that I'm proposing, and would you be able to implement that? The answer is with a resounding yes. They like the idea not only of the actionable tasks that you have within the processes, but the ability to implement that in a prophylactic manner for future changes. So what's coming out of the pandemic is really people are saying they need to be agile, but they really don't discuss what that is. Like, what is that? What is being more agile? But this gives the mechanism and the steps to follow. So that's a great question. And do I think that it's changed, or it has changed since 19 to now in 2022? I think we're more aware of it. I think we're more aware of these black swan events. I'm talking to you from Barcelona, Spain at the IOTA conference, and we were just discussing 100 years ago, there's a picture of people talking in Barcelona, and what if they were OD practitioners, what would they be talking about? And so they had just come out of the Spanish flu. And so there was a lot going on. They just came out of World War I. And so the idea of this and having a mechanism to be able to turn to it at any time is really important to people. So I hope that answers that for you, Sagan, and for our attendee.
Thank you, Ron. Another question comes from Eileen Fonseca. She asks, besides explaining why it impacts them, I've also heard that it's important to show why they should believe you can execute on this. Why can you make it happen? Can Ron comment on that?
Sure. So the idea behind RROD is not to replace the traditional stages of OD. So the same things apply to this model as when you are doing your contracting and you're building that confidence. And that is a common pushback. That is a common objection is, yeah, I understand, but can you really deliver on this? And the answer is, if we have a deliberate plan, and if we have some milestones and you know these actionable items and you're helping me do it, my question to you is, can we do this? The answer, I believe, is yes. And can we assemble a team that will readily be able to do this? Let's discover the people that we can put into place. So I know it's not meant to be a cop-out and throw the question back to the person that is asking, Eileen, asking you as the practitioner, can you deliver on this? It's the question of saying, well, what do you have to lose? This is a situation where we've got to try something. You've got to try something. Here's the value that I'm suggesting is we're trying something that if we do this, it's going to have an impact. The question is, will it turn it around? Maybe it'll solve one problem of 10, but at least that takes that problem off the board. And I hope, Eileen, I answered that question. But I think one last piece of advice on this, if that ever comes up, what I would suggest is a threefold way of responding. One is, it's called the feel, felt, found technique. I've shared this with many people. One is when you have an objection like that, or a question about that, questioning maybe your ability to deliver, you say, you know what, I understand why you might feel that way. This is a time of uncertainty for everyone. There are high costs here. I would imagine that there are other people that feel the same way you do. However, I have found that when using this skill, when using this model, we have been able to make good use of this model and impacted the organization. So that's a way of diffusing that kind of person countering you or throwing an objection your way, to bringing them to your side and validating them, first of all, and saying, yes, I validate your position. I understand why you're thinking that way and why you might have questions about this, but I really have found that this structure will really help you out. And look at what it's based on. Look at the foundations that it's based on. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Ron. So we have another question from Ken Crabtree. He asks, what techniques should be tried when leadership is just ignorant to the topic being discussed? Also, in addition, someone else asks, how do you change the expectation of an environment that has become comfortable with disappointment in change?
Second, you promised me you'd give me easy questions. Hey, Ken, how are you? Greetings from Spain. You know what? So this is getting back to that slide that I said about every organization has some challenges maybe that you're going to face. The cultural or norms that make this kind of difficult. How do you win them over? You see, you need to get the buy-in of the stakeholders. What I have succeeded in doing when the top level people have been sort of anti-OD, or they don't really care to learn about it, nor do they know about it, nor do they have any intention of exploring it. I've tried to find other people that are recognizing the importance of doing something, and they're, the pinch points in the organization. So finding people that are your influencers, to quote our friends from Twitter, find the influencers in the organization, try to bring them on board, And if those are the people that the masses are listening to on the front lines, ultimately the higher ups will not have an issue. They'll have to listen because those are the influencers, and that's how you're going to gain momentum. So it's not necessarily what we do with the C-level exec, but it's also identifying that. Now, the other question is how or in what manner, especially in a situation where they are just averse to any type of change. I think the only way to do that is through education, and try to do that in a manner that is palatable. And that is finding what makes the leaders or leader or leaders tick, what's in their wheelhouse. If you can make an argument, how it'll impact the bottom line on the financial statement and how quickly we can do that. I had a situation with Pepsi that they had a warehouse situation, and they were running into each other, almost killing each other after they instituted a software program that was $1 zillion, and nobody thought it through. And the only ones that knew that it was very dangerous in the way that they were grabbing materials was the people on the front line that were in danger of getting hurt. So the only way that the people, they were just looking the other way, oh, make it work, make it work. Well, the only way that they changed their mind was saying, we are at risk, at liability for somebody getting seriously injured because this software is not taking into consideration how we are set up to do our jobs. So they came around eventually. And what was it important to them? Liability and the cost. And also, how to maybe approach the solution in a different way, that milk carton principle. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Ron. I think we have time for one last question. The question is, I love the idea of standard operating procedures, SOP, and building muscle memory. Can you talk more about making those SOP repetitions automatic and sustainable?
Yeah, great question, because that's at the core, what is important, or, the core for effectiveness for RROD. I believe, my opinion is RROD is not a one and done. I believe it's an opportunity to be the one in the one and done, but I believe it can be repeatable. I believe that it is critical if you follow this in anything, right? In any type of change situation, it all is the same. Just take the black swan out of it. And if you put in a project that you're working on, it still works. It still works. It takes these components and it says, if you identify what the project is, right? Identify what it is to your masses, to the people that are going to be impacted by it. Show them that you are strong at the wheel and that you're doing something, you're going to be present. And then create that team that's going to help do it. And they're going to be the ones that are going to be the gatekeepers. I mean, just in that first step alone, what is wrong with that? That would be my argument. Well, I would say, what's wrong with doing that? What's wrong with not making this a standard procedure that if in times of crisis, I'm a national officer for my college fraternity. And I have taught my chapters that I advise that this is what needs to happen with whatever changes we are about to do. We're combating hazing. We're doing all these things internally where there may be pushback, and I don't know. But you know what? If we do this thing and it works with 18-year-old and 19-year-old kids that really don't care about anything but themselves, but this is working. So if it can work for them, I believe it can contribute to a standard operating procedure. I think in the hiring and HR, you can identify who those people are going to be that rapid response OD, that changed reading team. I think that's a good practice. I think your communications people should be on point, being ready to go about describing to the people how to communicate these strategies. I think there's an epic failure when you're just telling them and not engaging them. And then taking the time to build those coalitions. Right. And then, that execution looping, do that as many times as you need to, or any one of those independent stages, right? You can do that as many times as you need to make it effective. So I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for the presentation. Back to you, Abby.
Thank you, Sagan, and thank you so much, Ron. It was a pleasure being with you today. On behalf of our OD&C Workforce Education Program, we hope you think this webinar is helpful. If we did not get to your question, please send us an email or reach out to the presenter directly via email. For the future webinar, we would like to hear your feedback on our today's webinar. Please take a survey using the link in the chat box. It takes less than 3 minutes. Our next webinar is about transitioning from incarceration to reentry, a promising opportunity for OD by Dr. Joseph Harper on October 28th from 12 to 1 p.m. Registrations for all events can be found on our website. You can also find us on all of our social media platforms such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.